Chapter 1. The Rule of Respect. Miles Reynolds believed in simple rules. Not the kind you scribble on sticky notes or tattoo on your forearm, but the kind that live quietly in your bones. Unspoken, unwavering. Respect. Trust. Those were his pillars. Everything else was negotiable. Where to eat? What movie to watch? Whether pineapple belonged on pizza? It didn't. But he'd let Cindy win that one. At 32, Miles had carved out a life that felt steady. He had a job he didn't hate, a dog named Baxter who adored him, and a girlfriend who made him laugh so hard his ribs hurt. Cindy was sunshine in sneakers, bright, spontaneous, and just unpredictable enough to keep him on his toes. 2 years together, and he still caught himself grinning like an idiot when she walked into a room. Tonight was no different. She breezed through the door of his apartment, cheeks flushed from the cold, hair tumbling out of a messy bun like it had better things to do. "Smells amazing," she said, dropping her toad on the couch. "Please tell me that's not another one of your experimental stir-fries." Miles smirked, stirring the pan with exaggerated confidence. Define experimental. Anything that involves peanut butter and soy sauce in the same sentence. He chuckled. Then no, just chicken and veggies. Safe and boring, like me. Cindy crossed the kitchen, looping her arms around his waist from behind. "You're not boring," she murmured against his back. "You're consistent." "Wow," Miles said, deadpan. "Romantic." She laughed, and the sound filled the apartment like music. For a moment, everything was easy, comfortable. Then her phone buzzed on the counter. Cindy glanced at the screen, and something flickered across her face. Quick, almost imperceptible, but Miles caught it. He always did. She picked up the phone, thumb hovering, then set it down like it had burned her. Miles didn't ask. Not yet. He plated the stir-fry, handed her a fork, and waited for the silence to stretch just enough. Finally, he said, "You look like someone just texted you about a pyramid scheme." Cindy blinked, then laughed too loudly. "What? No, just an old friend." Miles raised an eyebrow. Old friend as in college buddy or old friend as in ex? Her pause was the answer. "Ah," he said lightly, taking a bite of chicken. "Blast from the past." "It's nothing," Cindy said quickly. "He just wanted to grab coffee. Totally random." Miles nodded, chewing slowly. He wasn't the jealous type. He didn't do drama. But he had learned a few things the hard way, and one of them was this. If someone still needed their ex in their social circle, they weren't done with them. And Miles wasn't in the habit of competing for love that was already supposed to be his. "Are you going?" he asked, voice calm, almost curious. Cindy hesitated. "I mean, I thought about it, just to catch up. It's been years." Miles set his fork down, met her eyes. "Your call." She searched his face, maybe expecting a flare of anger, a sarcastic jab, something sharp. But Miles wasn't built that way. He was a simple man with simple rules. If Cindy wanted to meet her ex, that was her choice. He wouldn't interfere. He wouldn't beg for reassurance. He'd just watch, wait, see what happened next. Because the coffee wasn't the problem. The problem was what came after, the texts, the casual check-ins, the assumption that Miles would be okay with sharing space in her heart. He wasn't. He needed to feel like her priority, not her placeholder. Cindy smiled, a little too brightly. "You're not mad." Miles shook his head. "Nope." And that was the truth. He wasn't mad. Not yet. Chapter 2. Coffee and Curiosity. Cindy stared at her phone like it had secrets. The message was short, harmless on the surface. "Hey, Cindy. Long time. Wanna grab coffee sometime?" She read it twice, then a third time, as if repetition could strip it of meaning. Her first instinct was to ignore it. Delete, block, move on. But curiosity was stubborn, and it whispered in her ear like a mischievous friend. "What's the harm? It's just coffee." She set the phone down and walked into the living room, where Miles was stretched out on the couch with Baxter curled at his feet. The glow of the TV flickered across his face, but his attention wasn't on the screen. Cindy could feel his quiet presence like gravity. Steady, grounding. She loved that about him. Loved that he didn't fill silence with noise or demand attention like oxygen. He was calm in a world that thrived on chaos. And yet, here she was, wondering if replying to a text was harmless or a crack in the foundation. Miles glanced up as she sat beside him. "You okay?" "Yeah," she said quickly, too quickly. "Just tired." He nodded, eyes lingering for a beat before returning to the screen. Miles wasn't the type to pry. He gave space, and space was usually a gift. Tonight, it felt like a mirror, reflecting choices she wasn't ready to face. Later, when Miles was in the shower, Cindy picked up her phone again. The message still sat there, patient and polite. She typed 2 words before she could talk herself out of it. "Sure." "When?" Her thumb hovered over send. She thought about Miles, his laugh, his quiet strength, the way he made her feel like the world wasn't such a mess after all. She thought about the man on the other end of this text, the one who had once been a chapter in her life but not the whole story. She hit send anyway. Miles wasn't worried about a one-time conversation. He told himself that as he brushed his teeth, as he folded laundry, as he scrolled through his phone pretending not to notice Cindy's sudden bursts of typing. He wasn't insecure. He wasn't loud or accusing. He was a man with simple rules, and one of those rules was this: if someone needed their ex in their life, they weren't done with them. He didn't interfere when Cindy mentioned the text casually, like she was telling him about a dentist appointment. "Just catching up," she said, pulling on her sweater. "It's been years." Miles nodded, calm as ever. "Your call." She searched his face, maybe expecting a flare of anger, a sarcastic jab, something sharp. But Miles wasn't built that way. He was a simple man with simple rules. If Cindy wanted to talk to her ex, that was her choice. He wouldn't beg for reassurance. He'd just watch, wait, see what happened next. Because the text wasn't the problem. The problem was what came after: the replies, the casual check-ins, the assumption that Miles would be okay with sharing space in her heart. He wasn't. He needed to feel like her priority, not her placeholder. Cindy smiled, a little too brightly. "You're not mad." Miles shook his head. "Nope." And that was the truth. He wasn't mad. Not yet. Chapter 3. The first crack. Miles woke early the next morning, the pale winter light spilling through the blinds like a reluctant guest. Baxter was already at his feet, tail thumping against the hardwood in a rhythm that said walk now or suffer the consequences. Miles smiled faintly, tugged on a hoodie, and clipped the leash. Outside, the air was sharp, the kind that made your lungs feel scrubbed clean. He liked mornings like this: quiet, predictable, safe. But his mind wasn't quiet. He kept replaying Cindy's voice from last night, just catching up. It's been years. Casual, breezy, like it was nothing. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe he was overthinking. Miles wasn't the jealous type. He hated drama like he hated traffic jams. Still, something about that text gnawed at him, not because he didn't trust Cindy, but because he knew how patterns worked. They started small. A text here, a coffee there. Then suddenly, you're sharing pieces of yourself with someone who shouldn't have access anymore. Miles had learned that lesson the hard way once. He didn't plan on learning it twice. When he got back, Cindy was in the kitchen, hair damp from the shower, humming to herself as she poured coffee. She looked up and smiled, and for a moment, Miles felt the knot in his chest loosen. She was beautiful in that effortless way. Bare feet, oversized sweater, no makeup, just Cindy being Cindy. The kind of woman who made you believe in simple happiness. "Morning," she said, sliding a mug toward him. "You look like you fought a windstorm." "Florida windstorm," Miles said dryly. "Brutal." She laughed, and the sound filled the room like sunlight. He wanted to hold on to that laugh, bottle it, keep it safe from anything that might dim it. But then her phone buzzed on the counter, and the knot tightened again. Cindy glanced at the screen, thumb hovering for a second too long before she flipped it face down. Miles didn't ask. He just sipped his coffee, letting the silence stretch like a rubber band. Finally, he said, "Busy morning?" She blinked, then smiled too brightly. "Just messages. Nothing big." Miles nodded, calm as ever. "Good." Later, while Cindy was getting ready for work, Miles sat on the edge of the bed, tying his shoes slowly, deliberately. He wasn't angry. He wasn't even hurt. Not yet. But he felt something shifting, like a hairline crack in glass. Invisible at first, but dangerous if ignored. He thought about his rule, the one that had kept him sane through past heartbreaks. If someone needs their ex in their life, they're not done with them. It wasn't about insecurity. It was about respect, about priorities. Miles didn't want to be anyone's placeholder. He wanted to be the choice, not the convenience. Cindy breezed back into the room, smelling like vanilla and confidence. "Big day," she said, grabbing her bag. "Wish me luck." Miles smiled, steady as stone. "Always." She kissed his cheek, quick, distracted, and he let her go, watched her walk out the door like nothing was wrong, like everything was fine. But as the door clicked shut, Miles felt the crack widen just a little more. That night, Cindy curled up beside him on the couch, scrolling through her phone while Miles pretended to watch the game. He caught glimpses of her screen, words he couldn't read, but enough to know they weren't work emails. She laughed once, softly, and Miles felt the weight settle deeper in his chest. Because the text wasn't the problem. The problem was what came next. Chapter 4. The first crack widens. Miles had always believed silence could be comforting. Tonight, it felt like a verdict. The apartment was quiet except for the soft hum of the dishwasher and the occasional buzz of Cindy's phone. She sat cross-legged on the couch, scrolling, her face lit by the glow of the screen. Miles was in his armchair, pretending to watch the game, but the score meant nothing. His eyes kept drifting to her, her smile, the way her thumb danced across the glass like it had somewhere better to be. He wasn't angry. He wasn't the type to throw accusations like grenades. But he felt something sharp and quiet, settling in his chest. A question he couldn't shake. When did I stop being the person who made her smile like that? "Good game?" Cindy asked suddenly, glancing up. Miles shrugged. "Depends who you ask." She laughed softly, then went back to her phone. Miles watched her for a moment longer, then turned his eyes to the TV, jaw tight. Later, when they were getting ready for bed, Cindy mentioned it like she was talking about the weather. Ethan says hi, she said casually, pulling her hair into a loose braid. He's funny. We were just catching up. Miles froze for half a second before sliding his phone onto the nightstand. Yeah. Yeah. She smiled, oblivious to the weight of her words. It's weird, you know? Talking to someone you used to know so well. Miles nodded slowly. Weird how? She shrugged. Just familiar. Like picking up an old book. Miles didn't answer right away. He stared at the ceiling, feeling the crack widen. He wasn't jealous. Not in the way people throw tantrums over imagined betrayals. But he knew what familiarity could do. It was a slippery thing, pulling you back into places you swore you'd left behind. Finally, he said, You happy with us? Cindy blinked, startled. Of course I am. Why would you ask that? Miles smiled faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. Just wondering. Cindy slid under the covers, her phone still in her hand. Miles watched her type something. Quick, secretive, and felt the quiet weight settle deeper. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. His silence spoke louder than anything. Because this wasn't about coffee anymore. It wasn't even about Ethan. It was about priorities. And Miles was starting to wonder if he was still hers. Chapter 5. The text thread. The next few days felt like living with a ghost. One that smiled, kissed him goodnight, and laughed at his jokes, but wasn't fully there. Miles noticed the signs, subtle but undeniable. The way Cindy's phone never left her side. The way her thumbs moved like they had a secret rhythm. The way her laughter came softer, almost guilty, when she read something on the screen. He didn't ask. He didn't need to. Miles wasn't the kind of man who demanded answers before they were ready to be given. But he watched. And waiting, he realized, was its own kind of torture. It was Thursday night, and they were eating takeout on the couch, Chinese, Cindy's favorite. She was scrolling again, chopsticks poised midair like she'd forgotten what they were for. Miles chewed slowly, eyes on the muted TV, pretending not to notice. Finally, he said, Food okay? She blinked, startled. Yeah, great. Miles nodded, calm as ever. Good. Her phone buzzed again. Cindy glanced down, smiled faintly, and typed something quick before setting it face down. Miles didn't miss the way her fingers lingered on the glass, like saying goodbye was harder than it should be. Later, when she went to shower, Miles picked up her phone. Not to snoop, not to scroll through messages like a detective in a bad movie. He just looked at the screen, at the name glowing there like a warning light. Ethan. Miles set the phone down gently, like it might break under the weight of his thoughts. He wasn't angry. He wasn't even surprised. He'd seen this pattern before. The slow drift, the quiet erosion of trust disguised as casual conversation. He'd promised himself he wouldn't compete for love. And he meant it. When Cindy came back, hair damp and smelling like vanilla, Miles was still on the couch, Baxter curled at his feet. She smiled, oblivious to the storm brewing behind his steady eyes. You okay? She asked, settling beside him. Yeah, Miles said softly. Just thinking. About what? He looked at her then, really looked, at the woman he loved, the woman who made him believe in simple happiness. And he wondered if she still saw him the same way. About priorities, he said finally. Cindy frowned. What do you mean? Miles shook his head, forcing a smile. Nothing. But it wasn't nothing. It was everything. Because the texts weren't the problem. The problem was what they meant. Chapter 6. Miles' quiet resolve. Miles had always believed that love wasn't about grand gestures. It was about the small things. The way Cindy laughed at his bad jokes. The way she stole his hoodies and claimed they were hers. The way she reached for his hand without thinking. Those were the things that mattered. Those were the things that made him stay. But lately, those small things felt smaller. He sat at the kitchen table Saturday morning, nursing a cup of coffee that had gone lukewarm. Cindy was in the bedroom, humming softly as she got ready for brunch with friends. Her phone buzzed twice in quick succession, and Miles didn't need to look to know who it was. Ethan. The name had become a shadow in their apartment. Silent, persistent, stretching longer every day. Miles stared at the steam curling from his mug, thinking about his rule. The one that had kept him sane through heartbreaks and false starts. If someone needs their ex in their life, they're not done with them. It wasn't about jealousy. It wasn't about control. It was about respect. About priorities. About knowing where you stand. And right now, Miles wasn't sure where he stood. Cindy breezed into the kitchen, smelling like vanilla and confidence, her hair falling in loose waves. She smiled when she saw him, and for a moment, Miles felt the knot in his chest loosen. Big plans today? He asked, voice calm, steady. Brunch with the girls, she said, grabbing her bag. Then maybe some shopping. Miles nodded. Sounds good. Her phone buzzed again. Cindy glanced down, thumb moving quick, and Miles caught the flicker of a smile before she slipped the phone into her purse. Don't wait up, she said lightly, kissing his cheek. Miles smiled back, but it didn't reach his eyes. Have fun. When the door closed behind her, Miles sat in silence, the apartment suddenly too big, too empty. Baxter padded over, resting his head on Miles' knee like he could feel the weight pressing down. Miles stroked the dog's fur, his thoughts sharp and quiet. He wasn't going to beg for reassurance. He wasn't going to compete for love. He'd learned that lesson once, and it had left scars he didn't care to reopen. If Cindy wanted to keep Ethan in her orbit, that was her choice. But Miles had a choice too, and he was starting to make it. That night, when Cindy came home laughing, bags in hand, Miles was polite, warm even. He asked about her day, listened to her stories, smiled at the right moments. But inside, something had shifted, a quiet resolve settling like stone. He wasn't angry. He wasn't loud. He wasn't going to fight for space in a heart that should already be his. Because love wasn't a competition. And Miles Reynolds didn't play games. Chapter 7. The misunderstanding. By Monday, the air between them felt different, thinner, stretched like a thread pulled too tight. Cindy noticed it first in the way Miles smiled. Polite, practiced, but missing the warmth that used to spill over effortlessly. He still kissed her good morning, still asked about her day, but something in his tone had changed. It was softer, quieter, like he was speaking from a distance. She told herself it was work stress. Miles had been buried in projects lately, deadlines looming like storm clouds. That had to be it. Couldn't be her. Could it? That evening, Cindy decided to fix it. She planned a surprise. Something simple, something fun. A date night, just the two of them like old times. She ordered his favorite pizza, picked up a bottle of that craft beer he loved, and queued up the movie they'd been talking about for weeks. She even lit candles because why not? Romance didn't have to wait for anniversaries. When Miles walked in, she was waiting with a grin that could light up the room. "Surprise," she said, arms wide like a magician revealing her trick. Miles blinked, then smiled, slow, careful. "What's all this?" "Date night," Cindy said, tugging him toward the couch. "No phones, no work, just us." Miles let her pull him in, let her kiss his cheek, let her chatter fill the space. He sat beside her, calm as ever, but Cindy felt it. The distance, the quiet weight behind his eyes. He laughed at the right moments, complimented the pizza, even clinked his beer against hers. But his laughter didn't reach his eyes, and Cindy's heart sank a little more with every passing minute. Halfway through the movie, she muted the TV and turned to him. "Okay," she said, voice soft but firm. "Talk to me." Miles looked at her, steady and unreadable. "About what?" "About whatever this is." She gestured between them. "You've been quiet, distant. Did I do something?" Miles hesitated, then shook his head. "No." Cindy frowned. "Miles," he sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I'm fine, Cindy. Really." But he wasn't. She could feel it. And the worst part? She didn't know why. Later, when Miles kissed her goodnight, Cindy lay awake staring at the ceiling, her mind spinning. She thought about the texts, about Ethan, about the way Miles had asked if she was happy with them. Was this about that? Was he jealous? No, Miles wasn't the jealous type. He was calm, steady, rational. But something was wrong, and Cindy couldn't shake the fear that she was losing him without even knowing how. Miles lay beside her, eyes closed, breathing slow and even. But sleep didn't come easy. He wasn't angry. He wasn't bitter. He was just tired. Tired of feeling like a placeholder, tired of wondering if he was still her priority. He'd promised himself he wouldn't compete for love. And tonight, that promise felt heavier than ever. Because Cindy's surprise was sweet, thoughtful. But it wasn't enough to erase the truth. The crack was still there. And it was widening. Chapter 8. The honest conversation. Miles had never been one for speeches. He believed in saying what mattered and leaving the rest unsaid. But tonight, silence felt heavier than words, and he knew if he didn't speak now, the crack between them would turn into a canyon. Cindy was curled up on the couch, scrolling through her phone, Baxter snoring softly at her feet. The glow of the screen painted her face in pale light, and Miles watched her for a long moment, memorizing the curve of her smile, the way her hair fell across her shoulder. He loved her. God, he loved her. But love wasn't enough if it didn't feel like home anymore. He set his beer down and said her name quietly. "Cindy." She looked up, startled by the tone. "Yeah." Miles leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped like he was holding something fragile. "We need to talk." Her brows knit together. "Okay, about what?" Miles took a breath, steady and slow. "About us." The words hung in the air like smoke. Cindy set her phone aside, her pulse quickening. "Miles, if this is about work stress." "It's not," he said gently. "It's about respect and trust." Cindy blinked, confusion flickering across her face. "Respect?" "Miles, He held up a hand, calm but firm. "I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm not angry. But I need you to understand something about me." She nodded slowly, heart thudding. "Okay." Miles looked her in the eye, his voice quiet but unwavering. "I have a rule. Always have. If someone needs their ex in their life, they're not done with them. And I'm not in the habit of competing for love that's supposed to be mine." Cindy's breath caught. "Miles, I didn't say anything when you got that text," he continued. I didn't say anything when you started replying. I figured maybe it was nothing. But now, it doesn't feel like nothing. Cindy swallowed hard, guilt washing over her like cold water. I wasn't trying to hurt you. I don't know. I was curious. I get that, Miles said softly. But curiosity has a cost. And right now it's costing us. Silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. Cindy felt her throat tighten, words tangling like wires. Miles, you're my priority. You always have been. He smiled faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. Then why do I feel like a placeholder? Cindy flinched. You're not. Then help me believe that, Miles said, his voice steady but edged with something raw. Because right now I don't. Cindy's eyes burned, tears threatening. She wanted to explain, to defend herself, but the truth was simple and brutal. She'd been careless. She'd assumed Miles would be okay because he was calm, because he didn't shout or slam doors. She'd mistaken silence for acceptance. And now, that silence had spoken louder than any argument. Miles stood, running a hand through his hair. I'm not asking you to cut people out of your life for me. I'm asking you to make a choice. If I'm your future, then act like it. Cindy rose too, her voice trembling. You are my future. Then prove it, Miles said quietly. He walked into the bedroom, leaving Cindy standing in the living room with her heart pounding and her phone burning like a guilty secret on the couch. She stared at it for a long time, then picked it up, scrolling to Ethan's name. Her thumb hovered over delete, and for the first time she didn't hesitate. Chapter 9. Cindy's choice. The apartment was quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant tick of the wall clock. Cindy stood in the living room, phone in hand, staring at Ethan's name glowing on the screen like a warning light. Her thumb hovered over the thread, the weight of Miles' words pressing down on her chest. If I'm your future, then act like it. She sank onto the couch, heart pounding. Miles wasn't angry, he never was, but his calm had cut deeper than any shouting match could. His voice had been steady, but his eyes had carried something raw, something that scared her more than anger ever could. Disappointment, hurt, the kind that didn't explode, it eroded. Cindy scrolled through the messages, reading them like they belonged to someone else. Harmless jokes, casual updates, nothing romantic, nothing scandalous. And yet, every word felt like a crack in the foundation she and Miles had built. She hadn't meant for it to matter. She hadn't meant for curiosity to turn into this. She thought about Miles, his quiet strength, his unwavering loyalty, the way he made her feel like the world wasn't such a mess after all. She thought about the life they talked about building together. The house with the big kitchen. The dog Baxter would finally have a backyard to rule. The Sunday morning spent tangled in sheets and laughter. And then she thought about Ethan. About why she'd replied in the first place. It wasn't love. It wasn't longing. It was ego, maybe. Nostalgia. The thrill of being remembered. But none of that was worth losing Miles. None of it. Her thumb hovered one last time. Then she hit delete. The thread vanished. And with it, the weight she'd been carrying. Cindy exhaled, shaky but certain. She wasn't going to let a ghost from her past haunt the life she wanted now. She wasn't going to let Miles wonder if he mattered. She walked into the bedroom, where Miles was sitting on the edge of the bed, scrolling through his phone like he was trying to distract himself from the silence. He looked up when she entered, his expression calm but guarded. Hey, she said softly. Hey, he replied, voice even. Cindy crossed the room and sat beside him, her hands trembling just enough for him to notice. I deleted his number, she said quietly. And the messages. Miles blinked, surprise flickering across his face. You didn't have to. Yes, Cindy cut in, her voice firm now. I did. Because you're right. If I want a future with you, and I do, then I need to act like it. I've been careless, Miles. I thought it was harmless, but it wasn't. Not to you. Not to us. Miles studied her for a long moment, his silence heavy but not cold. Finally, he said, thank you. Cindy swallowed hard. I love you, she whispered. And I don't ever want you to feel like a placeholder. Miles' jaw tightened, emotion flickering in his eyes. He reached for her hand, his grip warm and steady. I just need to know I'm your priority, he said softly. You are, Cindy said, her voice breaking. You always will be. They sat there in the quiet, hands clasped, hearts raw but open. It wasn't a grand gesture. It wasn't fireworks or sweeping declarations. It was something better, honesty, choice, and the first step toward healing the crack before it shattered everything. Chapter 10. The turning point. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the blinds like a quiet promise. Cindy woke early, her mind clear for the first time in days. She lay there for a moment, watching Miles sleep, his face calm, his breathing steady, the man who had never once made her doubt his love. And yet, she had made him doubt hers. Not anymore. She slipped out of bed, careful not to wake him, and padded into the kitchen. The apartment was still, the kind of stillness that felt like a blank page waiting to be written on. Cindy opened her laptop and began typing. Not a text, not a message, but a plan. Something that would speak louder than words. By the time Miles wandered in, hair tousled, Baxter trotting at his heels, Cindy was already dressed, her eyes bright with determination. "Morning," he said, voice low and warm. "Morning," she replied, smiling. "Coffee's ready." Miles poured himself a mug, studying her quietly. There was something different about her today, an energy, a focus. He didn't ask. He'd learned that Cindy's surprises were best revealed on her terms. That evening, when Miles came home from work, the apartment looked transformed. Candles flickered on the dining table, soft music played in the background, and the smell of his favorite meal filled the air. Cindy stood in the kitchen, apron tied, hair pulled back, looking like a woman on a mission. "What's all this?" Miles asked, setting down his keys. "Dinner," Cindy said simply. "But not just dinner." Miles raised an eyebrow. "Okay." She walked over, took his hands and looked him straight in the eye. "I've been thinking about what you said, about priorities, about respect. And you're right, I wasn't acting like you were my future. But you are, Miles. You're everything I want. And I need you to know that." Miles felt something shift inside him like a weight lifting. "Cindy." She squeezed his hands. "I deleted his number. I blocked him. And I told him not to contact me again. Because I don't need him in my life. I need you." Miles stared at her, his chest tight, his throat thick. "You didn't have to." "Yes," she said firmly. "I did. Because I love you. And I don't ever want you to feel like you're competing for space in my heart. You're it, Miles. You're the whole thing." For a long moment, they just stood there, the silence thick with everything words couldn't hold. Then Miles pulled her into his arms, holding her like he'd been waiting his whole life for this moment. "I love you too," he whispered against her hair. "More than I know how to say." Cindy smiled, tears slipping free, and for the first time in weeks, the crack between them began to heal. They ate dinner by candlelight, laughing like they used to, the air warm with something new, something stronger. It wasn't just love. It was choice. It was commitment. It was the turning point they both needed. And as Miles watched Cindy across the table, her eyes bright and sure, he realized something simple and profound. She wasn't just his girlfriend. She was his future. Chapter 11. The Grand Gesture. Cindy had always believed that love was shown in the little things. A kiss on the forehead, a shared laugh, a hand reaching for yours in the dark. But tonight, she wanted something more. Something that would leave no doubt in Miles' mind that he wasn't just her present. He was her future. She spent the entire day planning, her heart racing with every detail. Reservations at the rooftop restaurant where they'd had their first anniversary. A playlist of songs that had soundtracked their 2 years together. And, tucked inside her purse, a small velvet box. Not with a ring, but with something that spoke louder than jewelry. A key. The key to her apartment, engraved with a single word, home, because that's what Miles was, home. When Miles walked through the door that evening, he was greeted by the sight of Cindy in a sleek black dress, candles flickering on the counter, and Baxter wearing a bow tie that looked both ridiculous and perfect. Miles blinked, stunned. "What's going on?" Cindy smiled, her nerves buzzing like electricity. "Date night. But not just any date night." Miles raised an eyebrow, amused. "You've been on a roll lately. Come on," she said, grabbing his hand. "We're going out." The rooftop restaurant was bathed in golden light, the city stretching out below like a glittering promise. Miles looked around, then at Cindy, his expression softening. "You didn't have to do all this." "Yes," Cindy said firmly, her fingers tightening around his. "I did." They sat, ordered wine, and really talked, for the first time in weeks. About dreams, about plans, about the life they wanted to build. Miles listened, his heart thawing with every word, every laugh, every glance that told him Cindy wasn't just saying what he wanted to hear. She meant it. After dessert, Cindy reached into her purse and slid the velvet box across the table. Miles stared at it, brows furrowing. "Cindy, open it," she whispered. He did, and when he saw the key, his breath caught. "It's to my apartment," Cindy said softly. "But it's more than that. It's me saying I'm done with ghosts, done with distractions. I want you here, Miles. Not just sometimes. Always." Miles looked at her, emotion flooding his chest. "Cindy, I love you," she said, her voice trembling but sure. "And I want you to know you're not a placeholder. You're the choice. My choice." For a long moment, Miles couldn't speak. He just stared at her, the woman who had made him believe in simple happiness, the woman who had nearly lost him but fought to keep him. Then he reached across the table, took her hand, and said the only words that mattered. "I'm in, always." They left the restaurant hand in hand, the city lights shimmering like stars scattered at their feet. And as Miles slipped the key into his pocket, he felt something he hadn't felt in weeks. Certainty. The kind that settles deep in your bones and whispers, "This is it. This is home." Chapter 12. Love and Laughter. The night after the rooftop dinner felt different, lighter, like someone had opened a window and let the stale air out. Miles and Cindy walked into the apartment hand in hand, Baxter trotting ahead like he knew something had shifted. The candles from last night were still on the counter. Their wicks burned low, and Cindy laughed softly as she set her purse down. "Baxter looks disappointed," she said. watching the dog sniff the empty pizza box from 2 nights ago. He was hoping for leftovers. Miles smirked, loosening his tie. He's always hoping for leftovers. Cindy grinned, then reached for the playlist she'd made for their dinner. The soft hum of their favorite song filled the room, and Miles felt something warm settle in his chest, a feeling he hadn't let himself indulge in for weeks. Certainty. Peace. Dance with me, Cindy said suddenly, holding out her hand. Miles blinked. Here? In the kitchen. Why not? Her smile was mischievous, the same smile that had hooked him 2 years ago. Unless you're afraid of Baxter judging your moves. Miles chuckled, setting his phone aside. He's a harsh critic. Still, he took her hand, pulling her close as the music swelled. They moved slowly at first, swaying in the soft glow of the kitchen light, her head resting against his chest. Miles breathed her in, vanilla and something sweeter, something that felt like home. You know, Cindy murmured, I used to think love was all about big moments, grand gestures, fireworks. Miles smiled against her hair. And now I think it's this, she whispered. Dancing in a kitchen with a man who makes me feel safe. Miles tightened his arms around her, his voice low. I'm glad you see that. The song shifted to something upbeat, and Cindy pulled back, eyes sparkling. Okay, serious question. Can you still do the worm? Miles laughed so hard he nearly dropped her hand. The worm? Cindy, I'm 32. So? She grinned, daring him. Prove you're not old yet. Miles shook his head, but the challenge was too tempting. He kicked off his shoes, dropped to the floor, and attempted the worm with all the grace of a man who hadn't done it since college. Cindy doubled over, laughing so hard tears streamed down her cheeks. Oh my God, she gasped, clutching her stomach. You look like a dying fish. Miles collapsed on the floor, laughing too, breathless and ridiculous. Baxter barked like he was cheering them on, tail wagging furiously. When Cindy finally helped Miles up, they were both grinning like fools, cheeks flushed, hearts light. She kissed him then, slow, deep, full of everything words couldn't hold. And in that kiss, Miles felt the last remnants of doubt dissolve. This was why he loved her. Not just for the grand gestures, not just for the promises, but for moments like this, messy, silly, perfect. Later, they curled up on the couch, Baxter wedged between them like a furry referee. Cindy rested her head on Miles' shoulder, her voice soft. Promise me something, she said. Anything. Promise me we'll never stop laughing, even when things get hard. Miles kissed her temple, his answer steady and sure. I promise. And as the night stretched on, filled with laughter and quiet love, Miles realized something simple and profound. They weren't just fixing cracks. They were building something stronger. Chapter 13. Happily ever after with a twist. Sunday morning arrived like a soft exhale, warm light spilling through the curtains. Baxter sprawled across the foot of the bed like he owned the place. Miles woke first, stretching lazily, his hand instinctively reaching for Cindy. She was there, tangled in sheets, hair a wild halo, breathing slow and even, peaceful. His chest tightened with something simple and profound. This is it. This is home. He slipped out of bed quietly, padding into the kitchen to start coffee. The smell filled the apartment, rich and comforting, and Miles smiled to himself. 2 weeks ago, he'd wondered if they were standing on a fault line. Now, it felt like solid ground, stronger than before because cracks had a way of teaching you where to reinforce. Cindy wandered in a few minutes later, wearing his t-shirt and looking like trouble in the best way. Morning, she said, voice husky with sleep. Morning, Miles replied, handing her a mug. You look like you fought a tornado. She grinned, sipping coffee. And won. Miles chuckled, leaning against the counter. Big plans today? Actually, Cindy set her mug down, eyes sparkling with mischief. I was thinking we should start looking at houses. Miles blinked. Houses? Yeah. She shrugged, casual but not really. You've got the key now. Might as well get you a whole door. Miles laughed, shaking his head. You don't do anything halfway, do you? Not when it comes to you, she said softly. They spent the morning scrolling through listings, arguing playfully over kitchens and backyards. Cindy wanted a big porch for summer nights. Miles wanted a garage for his tools. Baxter, of course, demanded a yard big enough to chase squirrels like a king. It was silly and sweet and perfect, the kind of conversation that felt like planting roots. By afternoon, they were sprawled on the couch, laptops abandoned, Baxter snoring between them. Cindy turned to Miles, her smile lazy and warm. You know, she said, I almost lost you. Miles brushed a strand of hair from her face, his voice steady. You didn't. But I could have, she whispered. And I'm never letting that happen again. Miles kissed her then, slow, deep, full of everything words couldn't hold. When they broke apart, Cindy grinned. So, porch or no porch? Miles laughed, pulling her close. Porch. Definitely porch. As the sun dipped low, painting the room in gold, Miles realized something simple and undeniable. Love wasn't about avoiding cracks. It was about fixing them together stronger than before. It was about laughter in kitchens, dancing to bad music, and planning futures that felt like promises. And maybe, just maybe, it was about Baxter wearing a bow tie at their wedding because Cindy had already started a Pinterest board, and Miles wasn't about to fight that battle.